all 87 counties, physically go to all 87 counties. I think that's important just to keep informed and get out of the St. Paul Capitol bubble. So I really appreciate that. Obviously this year, for all the obvious reasons, that physical connection just isn't possible or isn't advisable. So this will have to be what we all live with for now. It's great to see some familiar faces and a lot of new ones as well. And I really appreciate your work as a league, both as a state, but also your particular chapter. I appreciate your energy, your activism, your commitment to our democracy, really. And it's not lost on me, obviously, that this is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. And I often tell the story about my grandmother, my late grandmother. She's no longer with us. She was born in 1902. And I remember distinctly talking to her when I was a teenager, when I was in high school, about her experiences. So she would have been 18 in 1920. Of course, the voting age was not 18 then. The voting age was 21 in 1920. So she didn't vote in the 1920 election. Her first election came after that in I think that for her presidential election, I know, was 1924. And so I remember her telling me vividly how much that experience meant to her. So she's someone who bridged those generations, and I will never forget that. I even remember exactly where I was and what room I was in when I had those discussions with her. So thank you for all the work that you do to commemorate occasions like that. You know, because our office oversees the Minnesota election system, and it's the biggest part of my job as Secretary of State, I like to say that I and we in our office are in the democracy business. And what a time to be in the democracy business. I think you'll agree. With me today from our office, by the way, is Michael Wall. Hopefully he can give a wave. Oh, there he is. Okay. With an appropriate background, as you can see, wallpaper in the background. Michael is with our voter outreach team. He wears many hats and does many things. One of his specialties, his main specialty, is focusing on youth voter outreach, young people. And I have to say, it's a feather cap that not only was Minnesota for the last 2 elections in a row, #1 in the country in voter turnout. So in 2018 and 2016, we were #1 in America of all the states in voter turnout. But in 2018, the last one, not only were we #1 in the country, but we were specifically also #1 in the category of 18 to 29-year-olds. And if you know anything about voting, which you all do, you know that is a very tough demographic to crack. So credit to a lot of people, but certainly to Michael in particular for some of the programs that he has established and nurtured. So, you know, that sort of sets the stage for what I want to talk about, which is that Minnesota has a really good record to be proud of and to defend as we go into this next election. And Minnesotans vote in high numbers. They find a way because I think we really value the importance of voting. But this year, for reasons that you well know, we face some real challenges. There are always a lot of moving parts in administering and running an election, no matter what the year and what the contest. And in a presidential year in particular, when there's more energy, more activism, more intensity of all kinds, no matter who's on the ballot, there are even higher stakes in some ways. And this year is no exception. But beyond all of that, we have to deal with COVID-19. We have to deal with the pandemic. And let me just give you a glimpse into our thinking in our office, what Michael and I and our colleagues are thinking when we evaluate this election in light of the experience of the last few months. Now, none of us on this call has a crystal ball, or at least it's a very cloudy one. So we don't know what the world is going to look like on November 3rd. We could make an educated guess. We could all huddle here and put our heads together, and maybe, let's say, as an example, we conclude as a group that things will be mostly okay or mostly better, or the worst will mostly be behind us by November 3rd. I hope that's true. But let's say we make that prediction as a group. That's fine. But what if we're wrong? What if we're wrong? If we're wrong and we run an election based on that wrong prediction, we're in trouble in 2 ways. First, from the standpoint of democracy. Second, from the standpoint of public health. And this is in part a public health issue. We believe that we have to view these 2 upcoming statewide elections, not just the November 3rd general election, but the August 11th primary coming up 2 weeks from today. We have to view those elections, at least in part, as a public health issue. So let me give you a little bit of the math. And I know you didn't think by joining this meeting tonight there would be any math but there's a little math. You don't have to do it. I'll tell it to you. Here's the math. I think you'll agree with me that it's simple math. We have about 3,000 polling places in Minnesota, about 3,000. We're expecting about 3 million voters in Minnesota, give or take. So that math is pretty easy. You do the math there, and that comes out to about 1,000 people per polling place on average. That's a very rough average. It's inexact. It's painting with a broad brush, I understand, but it's a good illustration. So roughly 1,000 to 1. Some of you vote in places that are much higher. Some of you vote in places that are much lower than that. But 1,000 is the overall very rough statewide average. And in a time of COVID-19, we think that part of the goal here is to get that number down, to get it down from 1,000 to 1 to something lower, 800 to 1, 700 to 1, 600, 500, maybe lower, I don't know. Because the issue is 1,000 people and their droplets circulating in relatively close quarters in a 13-hour period. Minnesota voting on election day is 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., 13 hours. So I don't know about you, polling place, but mine is a few blocks away from here. I'm coming to you live from Hopkins, Minnesota, which, if you don't know, is a suburb to the west of Minneapolis. It's where I grew up, where I went to high school, where I live now. And I vote a few blocks away in the basement of a church. There's not a lot of room down there. So you're thinking about 1,000 people cycling through that area in a 13-hour period. And we want to try to avoid that if we can, to get the number down a little bit. So that's part of what's motivating all this. And you know, you talk to people and see what the American people think. The Pew surveys recently did a poll of Americans, and it was a big sample size, and it was considered a very good poll. And the poll showed that 66% of Americans agreed with the statement that they would feel uncomfortable. That was the word, uncomfortable, going to a polling place at a time of the pandemic. So 66% in this highly charged, polarized political atmosphere in this country right now is a huge number in any poll. It's hard to get 66% of Americans to agree on much of anything these days, but almost 2/3 are telling us something. And I think we have to listen to what they're telling us. Now, that doesn't mean abolishing polling places, far from it. We're still going to have 3,000 polling places, but I think we got to get smart about this and think about how we balance the various interests here. And there's another thing. We have the benefit of other states' recent experience. Some of you may recall, even though it seems like years and years ago now, it was only a few months ago, you may recall the spectacle of the Wisconsin primary on April 7th. You probably saw the reports on TV, heard radio, saw online, whatever it is. You probably saw with your own eyes what I saw, which was very long lines, very frustrated voters, people showing up to vote who were either literally or figuratively shut out because there was a lot of disruption, and I would say even chaos in polling places in Wisconsin. Same thing happened about 5 or 6 weeks ago in the state of Georgia, and to a lesser extent in other states as well. And we can't have that happen here in Minnesota. That's not our tradition, that's not our expectation. There's no reason it has to happen. There are a lot of variables, some beyond our control, to be honest, that we've got to do our best to avoid those kinds of outcomes. And so, because we want, from a public health standpoint, to make things better, simpler, easier, safer, and because we want to avoid the election administration pitfalls of overcrowding at the polling place, we and I in my office have formulated 2 major requests, 2 asks of everyone in Minnesota, everyone on this call, every institution, organization, nonprofit, for-profit, everyone I meet and see. I talk about these 2 asks. So if Michael and I in our office are doing our job well, it means by election day in 98 days, people will be sick of us and sick of the message. So that's the test of success, I suppose. And so ask number 1, the first request, is to ask that everyone consider, please, voting from home this year. You don't have to. It's your right to go to a polling place, and that's fine. And I'll discuss how we're taking measures to make that a safe option. But I really ask that people consider voting from home. Now, voting from home is nothing new or radical or unique. It's basically a rebranding of what we have had for decades and decades, which is absentee voting. The difference is we don't use the word absentee in part because that word is kind of a relic. I mean, it's all over the state law books, but the word absentee implies absence, that you're absent to have that ballot. But as some of you know, since 2013, we have had so-called no excuses absentee voting, meaning you don't have to have an excuse or a reason or an explanation of any kind anymore. You used to. You don't now. So any eligible voter can simply say, please send me the ballot at home. And you don't have to give a reason, and it's no one's business what your reason or excuse is. So you don't have to be absent. And so we are really pushing that as an option for people to consider. And it's super easy to do. By far, most people go to the website, and the website is mnvotes.org, mnvotes, V-O-T-E-S.org. It will take you maximum 5 minutes, maximum, to go online and to figure out how to order it online. If you don't want to do it that way, you can still do it the regular way by going to a county courthouse or to a city hall, or having a friend download and print a form. So you can do it the paper way, or you can do it the way most people do it, online, but it's a very simple process to simply order the ballot you're already entitled to vote and order that sent to you at home. Now, normally the pitch or the advantage of voting from home is comfort and convenience, right? You can vote with your feet up. You can vote while you're folding laundry or eating a meal or watching TV. You can put the ballot down for a day or 2 or 3 or a week or 2 weeks, pick it up again and resume your voting. And people really like that. In fact, we're not starting from zero this year. In 2018, our last big statewide election, 24% of Minnesota voters already voted absentee in some form, some by mail and some in person by stopping by City Hall or stopping by a county courthouse. But 24%, almost a quarter, voted on some time or place that wasn't election day and not their typical polling place. So we're starting at a level higher than zero. People are already becoming accustomed to this as an option, and many people like it. But as I say, the usual pitch is comfort and convenience. This year, I would say there is an added and important reason to vote from home, and that is that it is a public service. Every person who votes from home this year is making the polling place safer for the people on election day who choose that option instead of voting from home, which is their right. But it gets that number down. It makes a small dent in that 1,000 to 1 ratio. So now, because of you, maybe it's 999. And because of your neighbor, it's 998, and so on. And so we can all collectively really make a difference. Look, I love nothing more than election day, not just because of the job I do, but just generally speaking, to me, I always joke, it's like the Super Bowl and the World Series combined. I love the energy and the excitement and the suspense of election night. It's great. I suspect many of you do as well. And I love nothing more than going into the polling place, thanking the election judges, bringing my little kids in. I have a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old. We love to do that as a family, but we're not going to do that this year. My wife and I are going to vote in the primary and in the general election from home. We're not going to go to the polling place. And so I'm asking that people consider that this year. And, you know, that act of making it safe in the polling place applies not just to the voters, but it applies also to the poll workers or to the election judges. And that leads me to my second big ask. The first one is please consider voting from home. The second one is for folks to please consider being an election judge or a poll worker. How many people here on this call have ever, even one time, been an election judge? Can I see a show of hands? I can only see the first screen. Let me see the second screen. Okay, good. A good number of people have done that at least one time. You know how some people make New Year's resolutions of some kind? I have a lifelong resolution, which is every time I meet an election judge who's ever done it even once, I want to thank them. So thank all of you for doing it, because I fully appreciate now, in a way I didn't before I had this job, how crucial that function is to our democracy. And we need 30,000 people to step up and do that job every single election. 30, not 13, 30,000 have to do that. In Minnesota, that's a big number. That's a small army, and typically it has not been a problem. Local governments, it's cities and counties that are typically in charge of hiring and recruiting and training and paying election judges. They've done a fantastic job, even through some really difficult challenges, of always making sure we had those 30,000 folks showing up and doing that job. But this year we have some extra challenges because of COVID. It's no surprise that our election judges in Minnesota and everywhere I'm aware of in the United States tend to skew older. They tend disproportionately to be seniors or retirees or others, and that's great. They've done a phenomenal job. But some chunk of our existing election judge corps are choosing apparently to take themselves out of the running just to be cautious, just to not take any extra risks. And that means we have to replenish their ranks. And that's going to take some doing. It's going to take some real intentionality. And so it's up to us, and I say us, not just our office, but everyone on this call, I hope, to educate folks that you run into about what the job is and isn't. First of all, one of the reasons I use the term poll worker more than I use election judge, even though election judge is the term in state law and in all the statute books, is I think it tends to be a little confusing to some people. When you hear the term judge, you might think of a black robe and holding a gavel in your hand and that sort of thing. And obviously we know amongst friends here that that's not the case. And so I tend to use the term poll worker a little bit more for that reason, but they're interchangeable. They're the same thing. And so we got to make sure that we get enough people doing that job. And that means educating people that first, it's not a volunteer position. It is very much a paid position. Second, the training is only 2 hours long, the state required training. Third, that training this year is universally available online if you choose. So you can do it from the comfort of your own home if you choose. The other option is available as well. Next, adding that you can do this job as young as 16 years old, not 18, 16. For those 18 and older, if you're 18 and older, there are no geographic restrictions inside the borders of Minnesota. So if someone lives in Northfield and they want to help out in Minneapolis or vice versa, you can do that. You're not limited to your county or city. If you're 16 and 17, oddly enough, the rule is you're limited to your county or an adjacent county. Touch your county. I don't know why that's the way it is, but it's been that way for a long time. So you could go to County A and whatever county touches County A. But for everyone 18 and above, there are no such restrictions. You can go anywhere in Minnesota. So I think that's very important, a very important point to get across. And it's a wonderful experience to nurture our democracy and help it on the day when it's needed most. Two other things I want to add to anyone either on this call or anyone I meet who's on the fence about being an election judge from the standpoint of health. The first is that we're doing everything we can to get the numbers down. As I mentioned, ask number one is, please consider voting from home. So the person can be quite comfortable that they're not going to face 1,000 people snaking through that polling place. They will face, in all likelihood, a number that's a lot lower than 1,000 people. And so that's good. Second, our office has invested the time, attention, and money, considerable money, to purchase and distribute to all 3,000 polling places necessary PPE and supplies. So every single one of the 3,000 polling places in Minnesota will have high grade, almost surgical grade masks for every election judge. They're not quite the N95 masks, but almost. And for voters who show up without a mask, we will have more regular grade and potentially disposable masks for them. We will have hand sanitizer and pumps. We will have wipes. We already have a list of protocols and rules in place for all polling places that govern everything from the use of pens to social distancing to the automatic wipe down of every polling voting surface after the use by every voter. So we're serious about making it as safe as we possibly can. So those are the two major asks. And I would totally understand if anyone who listened to what I just said would think to themselves or say out loud, wait a minute, isn't there a contradiction here? On the one hand, this person is telling me you might want to stay home and vote from home this year and not go to the polling place. On the other hand, this person is telling me, hey, how'd you like to spend your entire day in the polling place, right? What's going on here? He's telling us two things that seem to be at odds with one another. And I understand how on the surface it looks that way. But the fact is both things are true. We need to reduce demand on the polling place from a public health standpoint by getting that 1,000 to 1 ratio down to something more manageable. And we need to increase supply of election judges so we don't have happen in Minnesota what happened in those other states. By the way, if you look at what happened in Wisconsin in particular, one of the major reasons why you had the chaos in so many places in Wisconsin was a last-minute collapse of the election judge system. Now, this isn't necessarily anyone's fault. You transport yourself back in time a few months to late March and early April, right when COVID was coming along, right when schools were starting to close, right when businesses were starting to shutter. There was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety. We know a lot more now, even 4.5 months later than we did back then. And so what happened in Wisconsin, and to a lesser degree in Georgia about 6 weeks ago, wasn't that they failed to recruit enough people. They got enough people. It's that at the last minute, a big chunk of those people declined to serve. And so in Wisconsin, an admittedly extreme example that I think is very unlikely to repeat anywhere in the country, just because of the time and place that it took place. In Wisconsin, let me just give you one bold example. In the city of Milwaukee, they had planned for 178 polling places, okay? 178. You know how many they had on election day? 5. 5 polling places for the entire city of Milwaukee. That's the kind of collapse I'm talking about. Now, that is extremely unlikely, unless we have just a disaster of biblical proportions, I'd say, in late October. But we have to be careful because the consequence of understaffing in a polling place is longer lines. Now, I think that might be balanced out. I hope it will be by the fact that we'll have fewer people in those lines if we do our job and convince enough people to take advantage of their right to vote from home. But you can see, I hope, that both of those asks are complementary, even though on the surface, I understand how they might look otherwise. So I really appreciate your time and attention. I appreciate anything you can do to spread the messages and those asks on both counts. Again, we're not dictating what anyone should do. If anyone wants to go to a polling place, that's perfectly fine and equally as legitimate. But we are asking that people consider their option, a growing option, one that many people have already expressed an appetite for even before this election, and that is simply to go to a website or otherwise apply and get that ballot sent to you at home. And more people are doing it. One last figure, and then I will be quiet. And you didn't think there would be this many numbers, but we reported a few days ago that we have so far, this is just so far, we're not even in August yet, we have 470,000 Minnesotans who have requested their ballot to come to them by mail, 470,000. On the very same date, 2 years ago, that number was 28,000. So it's gone from 28,000 to 470,000 in the space of 2 years. I think people are trying to tell us something. Again, I think we ought to listen to what they're trying to tell us, and we're trying to facilitate that process. So thanks very much. I'm happy to hear your, not just questions, but your comments, your feedback, your pushback, your suggestions, your critiques, whatever you've got. And Michael is along here because he is a walking, talking encyclopedia on many of the rules. And so I'm happy to have him with me as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, terrific. Thank you very much for all of this. It's super helpful, and you provide a great context for the importance of all of this. There are a number of questions already in the chat, and you said to me, or no, Michael said to me that his experience has not been that the league lacks in questions for you.
Huh.
And for all who are members, I just want you to know that we are recording this so that we can share this out as well. So the first question comes from Mary Lewis Grow. And Mary Lewis, you are moving between now and November. So if I request an absentee ballot and vote while still at my present address, but I'm at my new address by November, will my absentee ballot be legitimate? Is that one for you, Steve, or is that one for Michael?
That's a tough hypothetical. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on when you leave. I mean, the usual advice we give, depending on the circumstances and facts, are if you think you're going to be in your new state for 30 days before the election, typically, it depends on the state, but typically you'll want to register in your new state.
No, can I just say, can I unmute? I'm just moving 2 blocks away. I'll be in my same precinct, my same district.
Oh, I thought it was another state. Okay.
No. But I just worry that if I request an absentee ballot and vote and send it in while I'm still in my old address, but by November, I have moved, and my moving date is really quite uncertain. And I'm in my 70s. I want to vote absentee. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to have my vote invalidated because on November 3rd, I was in a different address.
No, I think the best thing to do, and I know you say it's uncertain, but I would say if you can wait until you're in your new place to then order to re-register and order your absentee ballot to come there, if that works. It might not. If it works, I would recommend that strategy, and I always do, just generally. Now, if that happens to be 5 days before the election, then I would say no. Then I would say call your city hall or your county and ask them for their advice. It's really sort of dependent on the situation, but generally speaking, if you can do the later address, that's better.
Yeah, I have a different situation because I don't know when, but eventually I will move to Wisconsin.
Okay.
So how do I navigate that? How how long can I vote in Minnesota before I move? And if it's close to the election, you know, should I vote in Minnesota or should I vote in Wisconsin?
That's a great question. Again, generally speaking, it's best practice to vote in the later state. By the way, sorry to lose you.
Well, I need to find out where there's something in Eau Claire. League of Women Voters in Eau Claire.
Yeah, I would contact the city of Eau Claire, let them know that this is going on, and they'll have some advice for you too. Sometimes the law that controls is the latter state, and I just don't know enough about the Wisconsin law. So that would be the safest thing for you to do, was call your destination state and call ahead and say, look, I'm about to be a resident there. I can't tell you exactly when. Could you walk me through the process? You know, in other words, I don't know the rules in Wisconsin. Could you even order your Wisconsin ballot now? If it's a place that you've purchased and own or shortly will own, I don't know their rules, but I think it's the best practice, if possible, is to do the second or destination location and follow those rules.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to keep interspersing some of the ones from chat, and then if folks have questions that they want to raise. So the next one is, what is the last day by which to request a mail-in ballot?
Well, there is no hard and fast deadline. It depends on your tolerance for risk, right? So there is no formal legal deadline. I would recommend, for obvious reasons, especially if you're going to mail it in. Now, keep in mind, just because you receive it by mail, and most people send it back by mail, you can drop it off in person. You can go to City Hall or your county courthouse and drop it. You don't have to use the mail. It just has to get there somehow. The mail is how the vast majority of people use it, but you can drop it off as well. But if you don't think it will get to you in time for you to then in turn get it back to where it's supposed to go, typically a county, and I don't know what your own risk tolerance is. Obviously, the earlier the better, but there is no deadline. So for example, it's 2 weeks from today. It's 2 weeks from today for the primary. So if any of you on this call decided you wanted to do this for the primary, I would recommend, you know, the window's starting to close, right? I mean, if you went on mnvotes.org tonight and ordered your absentee ballot to come to you at home, I think you'd probably be okay within 2 weeks. If you waited another, you know, week, I think that's kind of pushing it, given the mails and all the rest. So I can't give you an answer except to say there is no formal deadline. It's just your own risk tolerance.
And this is from Pat. If you receive a ballot to vote by mail, can you still decide to go to your polling place, or do you have to use the mail-in ballot?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. I neglected to say. The good news about going to mnvotes.org or whatever way you order the ballot, it is a reversible decision. It is reversible. So you aren't stuck, you aren't trapped, your feet are not in cement. So if you decide, if you today go to mnvotes.org and you order your ballot to come to you, and then the clouds part, and you decide one day that, you know what, things are good enough, I feel good enough, I want to do what I usually like to do, which is go into election day, is behind us, things have gotten so much better, you can do that. You absolutely can do that. You're not stuck with that decision at all.
Great. And then there was a series of commentary just on voting, you know, how to vote, etc. But the next question here is from Cinda Nichols, who's the head of the Civic Engagement Center at Carleton. And she writes, I'm exploring the viability of college students serving as election judges this year and need to articulate how this could be done safely. Is there a safety policy we could see and share?
Yeah, I mean, it's along the lines of what I mentioned before. We are first trying to get the numbers down. And I think successfully so far, given where we are at 470,000, I think that number is going to go way, way up. Mm-hmm. We're going to make a major dent at this rate in that 1,000-to-1 ratio. So fewer people is part of the answer. And the other answer is the PPE and the supplies that we're ordering. So the hand sanitizers, the pumps, the wipes, the almost surgical grade masks for all the election judges, and then the masks that all the voters will be asked to wear if they don't bring one. So those are some of the things that we're doing, plus the protocols that we've developed. Those are some of the ways that you can persuade people that it is as safe as it will possibly be. Now, look, I have to be honest. I mean, is that a guarantee of anything? No, of course not. But it I think is a real big step in the right direction of making sure it's as safe as possible.
And I'm going to follow up. I'm going to use presidential privilege here and just follow up with that and say one of the things that I have observed in Northfield for example, when I was voting in the last primary, is that the polling place that served Carleton had an enormously long line that snaked around the building because college students are registering same day. Are you taking that into account as you're thinking about staffing polls so that places where people are more likely to need to do that registration would get a higher load of workers to keep it moving quickly?
Let me parse that a little bit by saying that is I know that at the county and city level, that is always a consideration. So they're the ones that make those decisions, not our office, about resource allocation and how many people and how many folks to have in reserve and all the rest. This year, however, particularly when it comes to colleges and universities, there are a lot of question marks. Maybe not yet. I don't know. Tell me if has Carleton made an announcement yet about formally what campus is going to look like? But I can tell you generally around the state, there's a lot of uncertainty. So is campus voting really going to look the same? If someone within Minnesota goes to Carleton, let's say someone from Mankato, and they go to Carleton, are they going to be on campus this year, or are they going to be doing distance learning in part or in whole from Mankato, maybe where they grew up? And maybe they're going to vote there. So there are a lot of question marks, maybe not as to Carleton, but as to a lot of places around the state about what that's even going to look like. But yes, generally speaking, college campuses, because of a lot of same-day voter registration, are really important. Michael, since we're in your wheelhouse now with youth outreach, anything you want to add to that?
Thank you, sir. I was waiting to jump in
Yeah,
to
go
pounce
ahead.
on this. We're working with colleges, and we'll do a lot more once we get a little closer so we know more about which colleges have decided to go which way. But the thing is that in Minnesota, a college student decides where they live, where their residence is. So someone is a Carleton student, but they're from St. Paul, and right now they're not on campus, but they either live on campus or an apartment close by when they're on campus. They may still consider where they live, their residence, to be at Carleton, which means that the beauty of our no excuses absentee is that they can, even if they're not yet, they can register as living where they live on campus or in town, wherever, and then get their absentee ballots sent to wherever they're staying right now. So the same system allows for a student who's living on campus who still considers themselves a resident of, in this example, St. Paul. They could have normally registered in St. Paul and had the absentee ballots sent to them on campus. The same thing works in reverse. So the messaging that we're working with colleges to get through to students is you have a decision about where you consider to be your residence. And then vote the easy way, vote from home, request an absentee ballot. We're not doing this right now for the primary, but we certainly will be pushing it for the general. So as soon as the primary is over, we'll be doing a lot more messaging through college administration and through student leadership to get to students for those two things.
Thank you. And we have folks here today from both St. Olaf and Carleton, and both are bringing students back. So it is a relevant question. So Secretary of State Simon, we have a few more policy natured questions for you. So Mary Lewis asks, more applicable to a post-COVID world, could you and your fellow secretaries of state band together to urge Congress to mandate X number of polling places per Y number of population people? I fear that people who want to suppress the vote will try to see that there are not enough polling places.
As happened in Georgia.
Yes, I have to tell you, Georgia is a great example where they didn't have enough polling places. That's just, to be frank about it, they just didn't. Could we band together? Yes, we could. but we would face a major headwind. There's a strong constituency in Congress and among the states for sort of state control of elections and watering down the Voting Rights Act and shrinking the number of federal mandates and commands, and that's had some unfortunate and I would say predictable results. So could we bend together? Yeah, I mean, I really like our polling place ratio in Minnesota. I know 1,000 to 1 sounds like a scary number in a COVID sense, but it's not. We have a really good ratio compared to many other states. So that's good. It's a lot higher in some other states. So we could, there's a lot of things that I'd like to see us coalesce around and collaborate on. Getting federal law changes on elections are really tough, is tough.
So great. If we have time, I want to hear what you do want us to work on then, because that would be helpful to us as we think about our work for the league for the next year. The next question, I'm just respecting others. How do you make sure that people don't vote twice? Thank you, Jim.
Yes, we get that question a lot, and it's a totally legitimate question. And I don't blame people for asking that. And sometimes, if I can add a little narrative detail, sometimes the question comes out like this. Someone will say, look, you talk about this voting from home and it all sounds well and good, but I'm a little nervous, says the questioner, about all these blank ballots floating out there, whether it's on pallets at a post office or whether it's in unguarded residential mailboxes. I mean, it makes me really nervous. What's to prevent if the city of Northfield is sending out its ballots on a Wednesday and somebody knows that? What's to prevent a clever would-be thief from hanging around mailboxes on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, hoping to snag 2 or 10 or 100 ballots for himself, vote them all, and send them in? What's to prevent that? Aren't you nervous about all these ballots just floating out there? Excellent question. It should be asked. Here's the answer. In Minnesota, as some of you have discovered, and as I hope you will if you go to mnvotes.org, you have to, when you order an absentee ballot, provide some personal identifying information about yourself. It can be part of your social security number. It can be your driver's license number. It can be a state ID number. It can be other things if you have none of those things. The point is some personal identifying information. So only if it has that going back, when you send the ballot back, will that ballot be counted. So unless the would-be thief has not only the personal identifying information of the intended voter, but knows which particular form the intended voter used when he or she ordered that ballot, unless the would-be thief knows that and uses that on all of the ballots that he steals, his plan will be totally foiled, and the ballots, I don't care whether it's 2 or 20 or 50 or 100 that he sends in, will never be counted. They will be destroyed. They will be incinerated, and his plot will be foiled. And what's more, if the person, the intended voter, doesn't receive the ballot, and a day or a week passes and they call or they contact the county or city and they say, hey, what's going on with my ballot? I haven't received it. You can get a new one, and it's one that is tied to you with a barcode. So it's tied to the individual voter, and the same process repeats again. So it's a totally legitimate question to ask, but in Minnesota, we figured that one out. And by the way, I did ask our elections director and others around the state who have had a lot more experience over decades than I have. And I asked them, do you know of a case in Minnesota where there was a mailbox thief or a post office thief who voted someone else's ballot? And they said they didn't know of one case. That doesn't mean there wasn't one case. It means they don't know of one. It escaped their notice. And so I just want to put people at ease about that. Is it possible? Sure, anything's possible. But it is almost zero, or let's just say probably zero, but let's just say to be safe, almost statistically zero, and very, very difficult to pull off.
And if I may add, I was going to mention 2 things, one of which Secretary Simon just said, which is that each ballot is barcoded to the individual. So they have to vote as that person.
There you go. Thanks, Kay.
There's an example right there. And if the question was also asking, what about the people who say, well, I'm going to send in my absentee ballot and then I'm going to go to my polling place and I'll vote twice. Well, as soon as the absentee ballot is received by the county, they enter it in their system. And if it is past the 21-day pre-registration, I'm sorry, the 14-day beginning to open up the signature envelopes and feed ballots, the roster is updated in one of two ways. If the roster hasn't been, if it's before election day, sorry, I'm trying to get 8 things out at the same time in my head. If it's before election day, then the roster that's going to be printed is updated with the fact that that voter has voted absentee. So if they come into the polling place and say, hey, I'm here to vote, the election judge will look at the roster or pull up on their electronic iPad roster and say, I'm sorry, you've already voted. You voted absentee. If it comes in, if that absentee ballot comes in on election day, that same process of updating an e-poll book happens immediately. And if the polling place is using a paper roster, they get a phone call immediately to mark that the voter has voted absentee. So if that voter has already gone into the polling place and voted, the election judge will say, this person already voted. And then they won't count that absentee vote. So there is a constant and immediate update and cooperation between what the county receives and what the polling place allows as far as who is eligible to vote.
Yeah, well put.
So I'm going to skip one question and come back to it, but Ellie raises the issue. There's been a lot of concern around the security of voting by mail. What should we tell people who are worried that their vote won't be counted?
Yes.
There will be some sort of fraud involved in the process of voting by mail. Yeah.
Right. So we've addressed the alleged or possible fraud on the front. Fraud. What about needless delay? So I want everyone to know that when you send that, well, first of all, as I mentioned before, you don't have to send it back by mail if you don't want to. You can physically drop it off at a government office at the county or the city. But let's say you, for whatever reason, want to or need to send it back by mail. It's not just a case of you have a mailbox and say a prayer that it gets there on time. You can track your ballot using our website. Go to mnvotes.org. That's our website again, mnvotes.org, and you can track it just like you can a package or UPS package. You can track it and you can know with certainty whether it has arrived and with certainty whether it has been processed. So you're not left wondering. Now, let's say election day comes and you sent your ballot in 10 days ago. It's election day and you're getting a little nervous here, and election day shows that they haven't received it yet. You have that option of going into the polling place. That might have not been what you wanted or intended. You might not want to take that risk. I understand that, but that is certainly an option for you if it hasn't arrived. So to those who fear that their vote won't be counted, you can track your ballot using that website.
Thank you.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
So we'll go back to a slightly earlier question. If there's so many people voting by mail, how will the votes be tabulated quickly?
Another great question. And this is where I get to be in the expectation setting business. So I want to say this to every person, and particularly those in the news media. I don't know if there are any on this call, but every reporter I meet and see, and I saw 2 today, I make this point. Election night is going to look and feel different to us this year, not just in Minnesota, but in all 50 states, because every state everywhere is anticipating a tidal wave of absentee ballots. And because some states, like Minnesota, have changed the law, either by legislation or through litigation, in light of that surge of absentee ballots, we aren't going to have the same finality, and we aren't going to have the same instant gratification, let's say, across the board that we're used to in Minnesota and in most states. Now, I think in the vast majority of contests, you'll know the winner, you'll know the results. But in close races, we're not going to know all the results on election night. And that's because in Minnesota, to use our example, the legislature saw fit at our recommendation to say, because we're anticipating so many more ballots coming in by absentee, that they will now have 2 extra days, at least 2 extra days. I'll tell you why it's at least, but at least 2 extra days to count the ballots that come in. I say at least because there's some ongoing litigation. There's a hearing in that litigation on Friday, and that might affect whether it goes longer than 2 days. But for now, as we speak right now, it's 2 days. So that means on election night, you're not going to know all of the absentee results that trickle in. Now, local election authorities, counties, will be able to report that night all the in-person results and all the absentees that they have on hand so far, which probably will be most of them. But there will be some that trickle in the next day. And so you won't have total finality. The good news is we will be able to report the outstanding number of ballots. You'll know what the ceiling is. So let's say that candidate A and candidate B are 1,000 votes apart. If you know that there are only 300 outstanding absentee ballots, you know that candidate A is going to be the winner. Even if all the available ballots come in and they all go for candidate B, you can do that math there. So we'll know the ceiling, we'll know the top number, we'll know how many outstanding absentees have not yet come in. We might not know the floor because not everyone sends their ballot back, right? There might be some who got one in the mail, but for whatever reason never sent it back. They just didn't want to. But we'll know the ceiling. So we'll have good information, but not perfect information on election night. And the reason I want to explain that is not only to set expectations, but also to set context, which is when you see that happen, not if, but when you see that happen, I hope you understand that's nobody who dropped the ball, nobody made a mistake, nobody fell asleep at the switch or fell down on the job. It's because legislatures and or courts designed it that way just for this year because of COVID-19. That's why. So it's nobody's screw up. Nobody's gonna, get a talking to or gonna get demoted or fired. This is by design. Just want everyone to know that it's not anyone's screw up when that happens.
Great. You have been doing a fantastic job. I just want to acknowledge how many questions we're throwing at you and just say thanks.
Oh, no, it's good.
Still a few more here.
We're used to it, Michael and I.
Will a notary or other voter signature be required in November? And if so, can a spouse be a qualified witness? And more generally, what criteria are used for excluding ballots in Minnesota?
Yes.
People know about the exact match signature issue in other states and are concerned.
No, let me address those probably in mostly reverse order. So generally speaking, as to our witness requirement in Minnesota, we don't do the signature matching, generally speaking. We ditched that after the Coleman-Franken recount in 2008. Instead, we have the barcode and we have the personal identifying information, okay? So you don't have to worry about all the signature stuff because people's signatures change over time or based on the day. What if you, sprained your wrist the day that you have your sample signature and now it's back to normal or vice versa, right? So that's really an imperfect way. In terms of who can be a witness, yes, anyone who's an eligible voter, a registered voter. So it can be a spouse, it can be a roommate, it can be a child, it can be a parent, it can be a sibling, anyone. It doesn't matter if they're under the same roof. However, there is some ongoing litigation which has changed the rules so far and may yet change them some more for this year and this year only. Only 2020, not backwards, not forwards, just this year. So in this litigation, so far, the court has ordered that for the primary only on August 11th, the witness requirement in Minnesota will not be enforced, period. You don't need a witness. I know the form says you do. It was too late to reprint the forms. You don't need a witness for August 11th under any circumstances. Forget it. You don't need one. You don't have to worry about it. As for the general election, funny you should ask, this Friday, there will be a hearing in Ramsey County District Court that will determine what will happen on that same issue for Elections Day. It's a long story, a lot of different litigants, 2 different cases. It's kind of a spaghetti tangle of litigation, but the big hearing on that will be this Friday. I don't know that we'll have a result on Friday. I don't know that the judge will rule from the bench, as it's called, and say right there in the courtroom what she's going to rule. She might take it under advisement, think about it for a few days or even a few weeks, hopefully not too many because we want some certainty and finality. But the point is, as of this moment on this call on Tuesday night, you will have to have a witness for the general election. And again, as long as it's a registered voter, it doesn't matter if it's someone on your own roof or a family member or anything like that. That's perfectly fine. But we'll know more on or after Friday about whether that, just like the primary, will also be waived.
I think we've made it through the chat questions now. So there's a way in which I could open this up to folks who have questions. I would ask one other one though first, because if we
can I change something? Can I just say a little bit more about my last answer that I forgot to mention. Thank you. I'll give credit to Michael. He just texted me to remind me. I said something that was a little overbroad. I said that under no circumstances would you need to have a witness. There is one circumstance, and that is if you are registering or re-registering to vote at the same time that you're voting absentee, then you do need a witness. But if you're a already registered voter, you will not need a witness. Thank you, Michael, for that. That was one detail of the litigation I forgot to say.
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah.
That's in August, right?
That's in August, correct.
All right. So I can open it up to questions again, or I have one other one, which is just, we also hear a lot about computer hacking and people being concerned about that. So there's like, I feel like you've addressed threats in the early stage, in the response stage. Do you have thoughts on computer hacking and the risk of that?
I have a lot of thoughts. So before COVID-19, that was a lot of what I talked about. And it's still a super important issue, but it's been obscured in some ways, in a lot of ways, by COVID-19 for all the important and reasonable reasons. Election security is a big, big deal. In 2016, Minnesota was one of the 21 states whose election system was targeted by a foreign government, period. That's not subject to debate or discussion. That happened. All 17 of our US intelligence agencies confirm that it's happened and have confirmed to me in briefings, in closed door briefings, that has happened. So we know that. The good news is nothing bad happened. The system worked. We kept the bad guys out, but they did intend to interfere with our election infrastructure. Now, the good news in Minnesota is that we are in a good position compared to many other states. And one of the reasons we are is that we are a paper ballot state. We're good old-fashioned paper. You know, we didn't do what some of the states did 15 years ago and go and buy a bunch of touchscreen only machines with no receipt, no paper trail, just vote and hope. We didn't do that. And that turned out to be a really smart move. I can't claim credit. I wasn't involved in this stuff then, but that was a really smart move. And there was a bipartisan and deep consensus in Minnesota that I hope will never go away, that we will always have a paper trail. So if anyone thinks they have a hunch or a bad feeling or a tip or anything, you have something you can touch and feel and see at the end of the day. And by federal law, we have to keep those ballots for 2 years. They have to be kept under lock and key for 2 years. And that's a good thing. So, you know, it's one of those examples in life you don't see that often where low tech is a lot better than high tech. Good old fashioned paper, it turns out, hard to hack paper, right? But I will tell you the real vulnerability then in Minnesota, the biggest vulnerability is not as much mischief at the polling place. By that, I mean mischief in terms of changing the results around or adding 1,000 votes to candidate A or taking a 0 off of candidate B's total. That I have much less concern about. I wouldn't say I'm unconcerned. I'd say I'm far less concerned. What does concern me is access to and vulnerability of some of the databases that our office runs centrally and that all states run centrally. So we run, these databases that are the spine of the system that have a lot of sensitive information in them that could, if attacked in the right way at the right time, cause some chaos on election day and beforehand. And so spending a lot of time, effort, energy, and money protecting those systems, redoing and modernizing those systems. We work very closely with the federal government, with the intelligence agencies. We invite them in to try to hack us. We invite them in to do the analysis of where our soft spots and weak spots are, and then we patch them and we fix them, and that costs a lot of money. Fortunately, the federal government, Congress, has come up over the last 2 years with 2 pots of money that we can use to put in place some of the changes that the intelligence agencies have recommended. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I will tell you what the intelligence agencies have already said publicly. I'm not spilling beans on anything I shouldn't spill here, but there are multiple adversaries, not just the one, but multiple foreign adversaries that have both the appetite and the capability to mess with our election infrastructure. So they have the want to and they have the can. They want to and can. Now, will they? That's a separate question. But we know of several who want to and several who can. And so we're on guard. I know I have to give a lot of credit to the intelligence agencies. They've been really good partners these last 3 or 4 years. And so we feel that we're in a good position. Can I tell you here that there's 100? No, I can't. Any more than Carleton or St. Olaf or the University of Minnesota or US Bank or Target or any other institution can tell you that. If they tell you there's a 100% chance that it'll be foolproof and nothing bad could happen, they're not telling you the truth. I can tell you we're minimizing the risks every day, and cybersecurity is like a race without a finish line. It really is. You've got to stay one step ahead of the bad guys all the time. There is no end zone where you do an end zone dance. There is no taking a break. That's it. You got to stay ahead of the bad guys and stay sharper and smarter and ahead of them. And that takes a lot of work. And we're doing that work. So I feel very good about the risks. I'm cautiously optimistic.
Thank you. You know, we are now at 8 o'clock. And so I
Okay.
am wondering, more questions have not appeared, but I also feel like you have graced us with your time.
Well,
And
let me just say this as just a parting comment. If any of you have thoughts or suggestions or ideas or worries or pushback or anything, let me give you my direct email at the office. This is the one that goes right to me. There is no gatekeeper. There is no screener. There is no person who filters it or anything like that. It goes right to me. And that is steve.simon, S-I-M-O-N, at state.mn.us. I'll say it again, steve.simon at state.mn.us. So let me know if you think of something tomorrow or next week or next month. Please let me know. Remind me that we met on this call and say, hey, I'm really worried about this, or you guys got to be doing a better job on that, or whatever it is. I'd love to hear from you. So I really appreciate your time and attention. I hope you'll spread the word about the two asks, that people should really consider voting from home, and people should also really consider serving as an election judge. So thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I have one last request, not now, because obviously it's beyond time, but we hope that maybe you will consider coming back and joining us, probably not before election, just because there's enough going on. But
Yes, the answer is yes.
I remain tempted by your question about, or your statement. I have tons of thoughts on what needs to be worked on.
I do.
I would say, would love to hear that from you.
Okay.
So consider
Great.
yourself